Okay, we are recording.
Okay, everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the Small Cruise Ship Infrastructure Master Plan. My name is Chris Myrtle, and before we get started with our formal presentation, I just wanted to welcome you and give you all kind of rules of the meeting. I think probably most all of you have probably attended at least a dozen or more Zoom meetings at this point, thanks to the pandemic. But just wanted to let everybody know that this meeting is being recorded. It will be posted on the project website and up for about 2 weeks to allow other people to view and to follow along what was said and the presentation. We ask that all participants other than the presenters to mute and turn their video off for now. There will be sessions where we'll be asking for input from you, and at that point that is a good time to turn on your cameras and unmute yourself if need be. Our speakers will have their cameras on so you can tell who is speaking during the presentations. We have 5 different presenters for this meeting. Towards the end, there will be 4 opportunities where we'll be asking for your public input. It looks like we have about 20 people on the call, which is great. So I think that's pretty manageable. And I think that since we've got a manageable number, we'll just see if the numbers go up significantly, but if they stay around this, we'll just let people jump in. If the numbers go up significantly, we may ask you to use the chat box just so that we can get input and to maintain a little bit of order. We ask that you hold all questions to the end of the presentation. After the 4 interactive sessions, there is a general question and answer period, and that would be the time to ask the team. If you want to, you can enter your questions in the chat, which is located at the bottom of the screen. If you want to track those, if you have thoughts as the presentation's going on, and we'll answer those when we get to the end of the presentation. We are looking at a 1-hour meeting, and what we're also asking people to do is to, if you don't feel like providing input now, we'll be collecting input for the next 2 weeks through the project website, where this presentation, as I said, the recorded message is available, and you can provide your input either by sending Eric at Docks and Harbors an email or by picking up a paper copy. We want to make sure we're inclusive and include people that may not have internet access. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if I miss you, my apologies, but I'll keep an eye on that. And a reminder, the project website is all one word, Small Cruise Ship MP at blogspot.com. That's Small Cruise Ship MP at .blogspot.com. So those are the rules of the road. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Chris. Carl, you could tell a port director would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Eric. And again, I'm Carl Yucata. I'm the port director. And I just wanted to, before I turn it over to Eric, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking time to participate. And I just wanted from the outset say and reiterate that Docks and Harbors, we're committed to the economic viability of Juneau. And we're also equally committed to the quality of life here in Juneau for all citizens. In the last 10 years, Docks and Harbors has executed $170 million worth of infrastructure projects, both in the Harbors enterprise and in the Docks enterprise. And up until a couple of years ago, that was a 50-50 mix. Right now, we're at about $90 million have been invested in the Docks, and about 60 million or 80 million in the Harbors over the last 10 years. And Docks and Harbors, we don't have all the answers. We realize that. And that's why we need public input. And that's what tonight's event is for, to receive input from everybody that calls Juneau home. We can't do it alone, but fortunately here in Juneau, we have wonderful professional consultants that are going to help us navigate the process moving forward. And Eric's going to introduce the consultants, but I think it's very important for this group to know that all the consultants that we have on this team are all Juneauites. They know the town, they know the waterfront, and we're just very lucky to have PND, McDowell Group, Corvus, Marine Exchange of Alaska, and Northwind Architects on our team. And so I know you didn't come to listen to me speak, and I'll turn it back over to Eric to get the show on the road. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, so my name is Eric Shaw. I'm the port engineer. And so before I get into the team that we've put together to put together this master plan, I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the photo that's on our opening slide here. You can see that ultra large cruise ship in the back at the new infrastructure that Carl talked about. In the foreground, you can see 3 more of our user groups. We have that pleasure craft up close. We have the vessel in the middle that's a small cruise ship, and then we have a fishing vessel. And so the genesis for this master plan that we've put together is to address the size of vessels that you see in the foreground. That's our IVF facility, and it is really a multi-use facility that is one of the major small cruise ship landing areas. And so there's a lot of pressure on that facility, and we've heard from the industry that they need some more space because of the growth in that sector. And so you'll see how we've addressed their needs, and we've looked throughout the city for opportunities. And we're going to bring you some of the top locations that we've identified, but it really comes down to the pressure on this facility and a few more in our city that we're trying to help this this user group find the space they need to be successful as we move forward. Next slide, please, Linda. So our team is made up of locals, as Carl said. We have P&D engineers leading the project and being our marine designers. McDowell Group has done a great job looking at the market, assessing the analysis, the economic analysis behind that. Corvus Design is leading us through this process, and they'll be putting together the documents. Marine Exchange of Alaska has looked at the navigational requirements for these vessels, and Northwind has worked with us to create some of these stunning graphics that you'll see later. Next, please. So this project started before COVID, but it's still a very valid process. We're going to come away with a better understanding of the market and a forecast of what this year was going to look like, but what we think future years will look like, because it's still a strong market, as we'll hear soon. We wanted to evaluate the opportunities for infrastructure investment. We wanted to develop estimates and infrastructure options through the conceptual design. And what we're coming away with is a master document that we'll use for the next decade. So while we may see a temporary downturn because of this global pandemic, we're in the perfect position to have a document that can guide us for the next 10 years or more, as we expect to see a rebound, and it allows us the time that we need to work towards a project. Any sort of project that grows out of this master plan is multiple years away, probably 3 years at a minimum. So we want to just make that clear that this is a long-term vision for what Juneau could do to support this economy and to support these user groups. And so this isn't something that will be developed next year, but we will continue to move as the market allows, and as we can use this document as the guiding light for providing new and improved facilities. Next, please. So this is the schedule we started with. We began last summer with a facility inventory. Basically, we started with a very long list of possible locations for improvement, and we identified the benefits and the struggles with sites, and we came up with a matrix. And then there was the market assessment that was provided by McDowell Group in February of 2020. We started the top site concepts in March, right when we started to see the effects of the pandemic. We worked throughout the summer to develop the handful of top sites and brought that to the Harbor Board in June, continued on refinements in October, and that leads us to today's meeting in November. With your review comments and your input, we hope to provide the final report by the end of 2020. Next, please. Some of the project deliverables will be included in that report. We'll have the borough-wide review of the facility and inventory list that we came up with. That will have a matrix that talks about the pluses and minuses for each facility and shows how they came to, how the top sites that we'll share with you tonight came to the top. It'll incorporate the market assessment and economic analysis provided by McDowell Group. And we will have some preliminary costs and the concepts that we've come up with. And that will, wrapped into one package, will be the Juneau Small Cruise Ship Infrastructure Master Plan for 2020. With that, I will hand it over to Heather Hoagland from McDowell Group to talk about her study.
Thanks, Eric, and nice to see everyone. Sorry I can't be there in person. I'll start with a few notes about McDowell Group. Most of you are probably familiar with us. We've been around almost 50 years, and almost all that time have been tracking, analyzing, measuring the economic impacts of the visitor industry in Alaska. We are based in mostly Juneau and Anchorage. I'm calling in from Bellingham, but I still will always consider myself a Juneau resident. I lived there about 12 years, so I was really excited to work on this project. It was a fun one. So as Eric mentioned, we conducted our analysis in the winter of 2019-20, and before COVID was just a twinkle in our eye when we were wrapping this up. So I'll add a few post-COVID notes to this, but the report is really reflective of pre-COVID environment. The sources for our study, and some of them are on the phone with me today, so thanks to all of, or on the Zoom call, thanks to all of you who helped me out, but we talked to a lot of cruise line representatives. We maintain a cruise passenger traffic database we have for years. And so we were in a really good position to tackle this project because we always track who's coming and going, what lines are coming and going, how are their itineraries changing, and how are passengers changing over time. Port of Juneau also gave us some traffic data for their intermediate vessel float and gave us some input on traffic levels. And then we also maintain a pretty good database of how passengers are spending their money and where, and also cruise lines provided us some information on their spending in Juneau. So that was our methodology. Could I have the next slide, please? So for this study, we called a small cruise ship capacity between 20 and 200 passengers. Couple of exceptions. There are a few smaller ones operated by Alaskan Dream that sort of get wrapped into their overall fleet. So we included those. We also included a couple on the upper end just to sort of make sure we were aware of the margins of this definition and what those ships are doing. But most of these small ships fall into the 50 to 100 passenger range. And only 3 of the vessels we looked at had a capacity of more than 100. So we looked at 8 cruise lines, and you'll see on the slide, on the next slide, how these break out, but 8 cruise lines, 21 vessels. They called 272 times to Juneau in 2019, and they represented 18,400 passengers. So that's like a good snapshot of how big this market is. I will mention that only 2 of these vessels are foreign flag. So out of 21 vessels, 2 vessels, that's the Ponant vessel and the Windstar vessel, those are foreign flagged, unlike the large cruise ships, of course, that are mostly foreign flagged. And just another note to kind of keep in mind, and Juneau's place in this industry is that most ships use Juneau as a turnaround port. So a group of passengers embarks and they disembark, and then another group of passengers embark. So it is really key, a really key location for most of these lines. There are some other ports that these lines use, Sitka and Ketchikan. Sometimes they do a Juneau Sitka and then a Sitka Juneau itinerary, or Ketchikan's also used, and some lines do a round trip Juneau. So there's all kinds of different ways that they use Juneau, but mostly it's a turnaround port. Only 2 vessels just stopped in Juneau for the day among all in 2019 among all these vessels. Could I have the next slide, please? So here's a profile. This is just a very small snapshot of what's in the main report, which is a lot longer, which goes into every single vessel, and the capacity and all kinds of detail. But this is sort of a summary of what's in the document. You can see that there's 3 major small cruise lines: Uncruise, Alaskan Dream, and Lindblad, and they carry 3,000 to 5,000 passengers each. A little smaller is a Windstar, which just has 1 vessel, but it's a large vessel. And then on down the line, American Cruise Line, also a larger vessel, Ponant and Fantasy Cruises. I'll just note that Fantasy appears to have had their last season in 2019. Even before COVID, they hadn't planned on resuming cruising. So they're not as relevant in our planning, but this is a snapshot of 2019. Another note is that the docks that are used are mostly downtown docks, right? So American Cruise Line uses the Delta Western dock out in Auk Bay, and Allen Marine, of course, has their own dock in Auk Bay, but all the other lines and vessels are using downtown docks. Next slide, please. So one thing we looked at before COVID, we looked at the 2020 schedule and just took a sample week so that you can see how these ships are really bunched up, right? So Sunday, you've got 4 vessels. Saturday, you've got 3 vessels. So 7 vessels all bunched into the weekend days. Another group of vessels on Wednesday. No vessels on Monday. No vessels on Thursday. So although we'd love to have 1 vessel a day and kind of spread these folks out, they do tend to prefer a week-long itinerary, you know, starting on Saturday or Sunday and coming back on a Saturday or Sunday. It just works with people's schedules best. So that's always a struggle. But I think going forward, we can probably anticipate ships continuing to bunch into the weekends. Going on to the next slide. Here's our volume over the last 7 years or so. You can see it kind of dipping down in 2016, 2017, and then really a bump up in 2018 and 2019. Also to put this in perspective, Cruise West, when Cruise West was active 10, 15 years ago, it actually was up to 20,000, we thought back then. So these aren't numbers that we haven't seen before, but that big jump up in 2018 is noticeable. A lot of the more recent growth has been these vessels being replaced, you know, smaller vessels getting replaced with a slightly larger vessel. One vessel in particular got a big chunk put into the middle of it, and so that increased their length and their passenger capacity, or it will in 2021. And some of these vessels are lengthening their season, so that just increases the number of passengers, right? So Uncruise in particular and the boat company were planning even before COVID to increase the length of their season, bringing more passengers. And we were looking ahead to 2020, you know, to pre-COVID, it looked like it was about a 5% increase. As I said, mostly due to that lengthening of the season and larger vessels. Please go on to the next slide. So some trends that we noted in our interviews, some lines noted that in 2019, it was a bit of a soft market and they maybe had a few more beds than there was demand for. They did comment pre-COVID that 2020 was looking like it was going to be a little more full. One line noted that they were already sold out for 2020. But there did seem to be like that glut. Remember in that slide, there was a big increase from 12 to 17, 18,000 or so in a couple of years. And so I think the market was kind of catching up with that. And the lines that I spoke with did not anticipate introducing more vessels in the next several years. You know, National Geographic or Lindblad had already added a couple of vessels in the last few years. There was one vessel coming into the market. The American Queen Steamboat Company still plans on coming into the market in 2021 with one vessel. But other than that, the lines that have been around a while, they weren't being really bullish on, oh, we got to get more boats out there and fill them up. There was an observation that these increase in the luxury midsize options, you guys may have been tracking this, but Hurtigruten, Viking, Silversea, these are the midsize folks that are about between 400 and 1,000 passengers, and they're on the higher price point, and they could have been kind of eating into this small cruise market, just overlap in the markets there. So that may play a role in keeping the market from growing too fast. In terms of post-COVID, so small ships are resuming operations faster than large ships. I actually looked at the list today, so this is latest breaking. On here, I said 20 vessels were sailing as of October. Today, I counted them, they're 26. And 9 of those vessels would count as small vessels. So on the worldwide stage, you know, small vessels represent a really tiny percentage, but a really big percentage of the vessels that have started sailing again. And it's very intuitive, right? People feel more comfortable getting on a smaller vessel. It's easier to maintain those COVID restrictions and to monitor and track and keep everyone safe. So I think that makes sense. So I think that this, all indications are for continuing positive outlook on this market. With this vaccination news, that's another factor to take into consideration. And also the domestic situation with all the COVID rates going up. And right now is when people are planning their trips. So there's a lot of factors at play here that are sometimes contradict each other, but those are some of what's going on in the small cruise ship world right now. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to note some preferences noted by cruise lines, or sort of their perspective on Juneau. Juneau was very popular. As I noted, it's a very popular turnaround port for these lines. They noted the jet service is so key, right? If you're going to smaller ports, Sitka and Petersburg, you might struggle with fewer flights or less reliable flights, but Juneau's jet service, at least by comparison, is very reliable and attractive for the lines. And then being able to get provisions and supplies at places like Costco, or larger stores, just more of a variety, more options for the provisioning. And then what's so important is all the tours and the retail and the hotels for passengers. I went into this wondering, these lines that really focus on the outdoor experience and the pristine wilderness, is that getting compromised in Juneau with all the hustle bustle and the big cruise ships? But that wasn't the impression I got from cruise lines. Their passengers really appreciated having that hustle bustle just at the beginning or end of their voyage, and having those retail opportunities, having an opportunity to take the tram and do a hike up there, or go on a particular tour that's available in Juneau. So there really was a strong preference and appeal of Juneau for these small cruise lines. They also really prefer downtown. Just, anytime you can avoid putting people on a bus or a van, that's a bonus, right, for these lines. And just being able to walk to a hotel is hugely attractive. And yeah, as I mentioned, the presence of the large ships wasn't seen as a huge drawback. You're going to have large ships most places in Southeast, one person pointed out, whether you're in Sitka or Skagway, right? You're going to have the large ships around. And Auk Bay wasn't seen as appealing. The line that's out there, Allen Marine, clearly they want to use their dock, but the other line, I think they would prefer downtown. They were downtown, and then their ship length, they got a bigger ship, and so they sort of were forced to go to Auk Bay, but they'd really prefer to be downtown for the reasons I noted. And downtown isn't a picnic in all cases, right, for these lines, because docking space is really, really tight. You've got all the traffic going around with the float planes and the fishing vessels and the large cruise ships. There's a lot to navigate. Docking infrastructure, not great, not particularly new or convenient. And then this hotel space was an issue, just not enough beds, and then maybe not as high quality as their passengers would like. Lack of parking was also noted as an issue, as everyone here on the Zoom call, I'm sure, knows parking in downtown Juneau. Next slide, please. So we asked, what do you need for your infrastructure? What kinds of services do you need? And we went into great detail on the kinds of engines they had and whether they needed a starboard or port. And I tried to distill everything down into this slide, but there's a lot more detail in the report that you can look at if you like. So most vessels are in that 150 to 200 foot length. Water and sewer needed for most line, trash and recycling. About half the lines needed fuel access, and they noted number 2 diesel as the kind of fuel that they needed. They weren't as interested in shore power. Parking and staging areas were really preferred. As I mentioned, with this turnaround aspect, you've got people with their luggage, you've got a lot of provisioning that needs to happen. So that's very helpful to have some parking and staging areas and drive down for luggage and stuff. And then we asked about security needs. That does vary line by line. And of course, the foreign flag vessels have very stringent security requirements. But as I said, there are only 2 out of the 21 vessels. But some amenities noted were a lockable gate and cameras and barriers. And then only 3 of the vessels, or the lines, I should say, needed line handlers or longshoremen. So that's just a quick summary of kind of the more important needs noted by the cruise lines when asked what kind of infrastructure they needed. Next slide, please. We also asked CBJ, their perspective on what was needed and where they were getting squeezed. So they did an analysis of the IVF, the intermediate vessel float reservation data. And in 2018, they noted 60 days that they were at or over capacity. In 2019, 51 days at or over capacity, which is a big chunk of the summer, right? And they noted that in July and August, they turned vessels away 5 days a week. And in June and September, once or twice a week. But that is a lot of vessels turning away. They could be yachts, they could be, all kinds of vessels, fishing vessels, but it does get very, very congested down there. And they recommended a 350-foot float with berths on both sides, so 750 feet of availability of moorage space. And I know Dick is going to go more into that as we go forward. Next slide. So my final slide is about what do these lines bring Juneau? And we estimated that they bring about $13 million between passengers, crew members, and cruise lines. We were careful not to apply we did actually do some surveys out of the Juneau Airport a couple of years ago for Travel Juneau, where we caught a bunch of these cruise passengers who were exiting Juneau via the airport. So we were able to ask them, how long did you stay? How much did you spend? What did you spend on? All that sort of thing. We're always very careful not to double count spending. So if they said that, the cruise lines sometimes spend on hotel on the passengers behalf, but we always are very careful not to double count those numbers. You can see that those on turnaround, embarking or disembarking passengers are spending a lot more. They're spending $575 per person on average, according to our survey research. Day passengers, we assume they're spending about the same amount as the large cruise ship passengers, so about $160. So we applied different rates depending on whether passengers were staying for the day or staying over or embarking or disembarking. Crew members, we have done some crew member surveys in the past, over the course of a summer, they're going to spend money on dining and transportation and shopping and things like that. And then note that the cruise lines also, spend quite a bit of money in locally. They purchase fuel, they get their linens laundered, they charter vans to get their passengers around to the airport and things like that, hotel rooms, dockage fees. So overall, passengers estimated, this industry is estimated to spend about $13 million, or at least in 2019, that was a figure that we came up with. So yeah, just important to keep in mind, although the small cruise passengers represent a fairly small, just about 2% of the overall volume that Juneau gets, but they do spend that extra time and spend extra dollars in our economy. That's it for me. I think I am passing it off to Dick Somerville.
Well, thank you, Heather, and good evening, everyone. My name is Dick Somerville, and I'm a principal of PND Engineers. And I'm the manager of PND's Southeast Alaska engineering operations here located in Juneau. PND has had the good fortune of working on the Juneau waterfront for over 40 years now. We've designed, we've planned, we've permitted, we've managed the construction on many port and harbor projects. We were the engineers of record on both of the private docks in downtown Juneau, the AJ dock, as well as the South Franklin dock. And more recently, we were the engineer on the CBJ's North and South berth under their 16B project that just finished a couple of years ago. So we're very fortunate to have been involved with all of that. And now we feel real happy to be involved with looking at the small cruise ship industry and what we can do to plan infrastructure, for them. So with any planning effort, there are some really key findings that help guide PND in our efforts to really plan infrastructure and site development projects. I'd like to go over a couple of these because in some of the next slides, I'll be referring to some of these key findings. And as Heather had indicated in her market study, that the cruise industry really prefers the downtown central waterfront area. They want to be in the mix of things. They want to be next to bars and restaurants and hotels and have all the amenities, do shopping. And they like the walkability of the town. That is a pretty clear message that we've received through McDowell's interviews with the cruise lines. And then secondly, as Heather had indicated, is that Docks and Harbors really has looked at their fleet reservations and all their databases and so forth. And they've they need 700 lineal feet of floating moorage to service the current demand for this industry. And that's so they don't have to turn vessels away. And they do turn vessels away in the peak months of July and August, 5 days a week. So these are key findings, and I'll be referring to them as we move forward. So let's go on to the next slide. So our team really assessed sites throughout the borough, and really these 6 sites kind of rose to the top for further, possible development within the community. And not all of them are located downtown, as Heather indicated. Auk Bay really wasn't in the running in terms of what the industry had desired, but we thought we would take a look at that. You will see some slides on that, but we also looked at the Little Rock dump. We looked at Douglas Harbor. We looked at Harris Harbor. We worked with Norwegian Cruise Lines in their development of the subport a little bit, and we have a potential option for that as well. We won't be focusing too much on their project tonight because they have a presentation for the community next week, actually, but we're going to take a look at that here as well. But then lastly, we looked at the NOAA and the Seadrome site, and that has emerged as the Docks and Harbors preferred site for future development for this facility. So now I'd like to walk through on these next slides, really some of the concept plans that we've looked at for each of these sites. And the first one is Auk Bay. This is a concept that was actually developed several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when GSA was trying to disperse the federal property after the NOAA facility was no longer needed, and those operations had long moved out to Lena Point. And so both CBJ and the university received some property when that property was dispersed. And as part of that process, each of those new landowners had to develop a plan that showed how they would put this into public use. So this Auk Bay Marine Station plan is what we're going to talk about here real briefly. So right in the middle of the facility where it says 5,000 lineal feet of moorage expansion right in there, that's where the current floating wave attenuator that protects the harbor is located. This plan would remove that floating wave attenuator and replace it with this moorage. And then external to that, seaward of that, is a new floating wave attenuator. It's an L-shaped facility. And yeah, right in there. So the long leg of that is 1,500 feet long, and the shorter leg is 925 feet long. So that adds up to about 2,400 lineal feet of moorage. When you moor on both sides of that float, you end up with 4,800 lineal feet. Well, the small cruise industry really only needs 700 lineal feet of it. So they would occupy, potentially, if this were the site, that outside corner where you see the 3 ships right in the corner of the L. That's about as much space as they would need to fully satisfy the demand. So this was looked at, and the industry has moored out here in the past. So we thought we would just show this as a plan. It hasn't risen to the top, obviously, but it does show that it could service an overflow of vessels if ever needed. I'd like to talk a little bit about cost. Now you see a budget figure in the lower right-hand corner of 15.7 million. That is an estimate for just the shorter leg of that floating wave attenuator. This whole plan is in excess of $60 million. But if we were to just assign some portion of it to what the small cruise industry would need, that shorter leg, along with a new gangway, an approach dock, it's a new parking area in the former NOAA site up there, that would all come to a total rough budget of 15.7 million. And that budget, and I'll be speaking about several budgets here tonight, but that budget is total project cost. Total project cost is not only construction, but it's contingencies and indirect cost. In this case, on all of these budgets, we've used 15% for contingency. That's for unforeseen conditions during construction and just the early planning level of these concepts. That's what we've used, but the rest of the indirect costs are things like permitting, surveying, geotech investigations, designs, contract documents, contract administration, construction inspection. All told, those indirect and contingencies are usually about a third of the total project cost. So 2/3 is the capital investment, the actual construction, and about a third of that is contingency and indirect. So 15.7 total project cost for this option here. So let's go on to the next one. This is where we looked at several downtown vicinity sites. This is just an overview of the downtown harbor area. We're going to look at 5 sites here. The Little Rock dump towards the south right there is one site. Across the channel to the entrance of Douglas Harbor is another site we'll look at. And then far to the north, all the way and under the bridge, is Harris Harbor. We've got a little project there. And then coming in towards the subport, this is the NCL proposal here, a preliminary proposal at this stage. We'll be looking at options there. And then the preferred site is at the other end of the subport. The NOAA and the Seadrome site are right there. So that just gives you kind of vicinity along with what all the other cruise ships facilities look like in town. So let's move to the next site. This is a concept that we developed for the Little Rock dump. The Little Rock dump itself has got quite a history. It was once a landfill. After that, it was a sludge disposal dump from the wastewater treatment plant. That's what all those they look like little golf courses, but they're actually sludge pits. That was capped many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and closed out as a landfill. But the point being is that that whole Little Rock dump is pretty high in elevations. It's 55 to 60 feet above the water, makes it very difficult to have the grades work out down to the water. So we looked at advancing a fill and a staging area along the north side of that peninsula. You can see it there. That would lead to a pile supported approach dock offshore to deeper water right there. There's a little turnaround at the end of that for parking at the end of the approach dock. Yeah. And then there's a gangway, a drivable gangway for small vehicles to get onto the float. And the float itself is 32 by 350. So you do get the 700 lineal feet of moorage there by counting both the inside and outside berth. But one thing about this site is that it's heavily exposed to the wind and wave environment from Gastineau Channel. And so there would likely need to be some sort of protection there. So we're showing in concept anyway, just a wave barrier, and that would break down the winds and waves for impacting that float. So when you look all in here, this is a total project budget of 21.9 million. Again, a third of that is indirect and soft costs, and the rest is construction. This is about 1.5 miles from downtown, the central downtown area. It's not walkable. It's probably not going to be the concept of choice as a result of that. But let's move on to the next slide. Here's an option that we looked at Douglas Harbor. Right at the entrance to the harbor, there's a floating wave attenuator that was installed by the Corps of Engineers a number of years ago, along with a couple of rubble mound breakwaters that protect the entrance to the harbor. This concept would look at extending that float to the north with a new float, and that float is roughly 20 feet by 250 feet. The existing wave attenuator is 230 feet, so you have an overall length there of about 480 feet on the outer berth, and there's enough room on the inside to get another 100-foot vessel on the north inside berth there. So it doesn't quite get to 700 feet, but the facility would be just a small pile-supported pad or a deck at the edge of the fill there, leading again to a drivable gangway down onto the float. One of the problems with this is a heavily utilized area for launching of boats and whatnot. So there's trailer parking and whatnot. And so this would cut into the uplands development for any sort of upland expansion. But this is a lower cost option. It's budgeted at $7.6 million total project cost. So let's move to the next one. Harris Harbor. So you can see the bridge, and just inside the entrance to the harbor, there's a roadway that runs under the bridge there. It's a very narrow traveled way there. We looked at what could we do to increase the uplands in this vicinity, and also to increase moorage capacity. So this is what this is showing is a sheet pile bulkhead. It's roughly 565 feet long right in there. That would be filled and create about an acre of new uplands. It's roughly 60-foot average width off the existing roadway. It's about 40 on one end and 80 on the other end. And then in front of that, we would have to dredge the basin out to get water depths that are deep enough for these vessels. And so there would be a dredging component to this. And then at both ends of this bulkhead, there'd be a pile supported platform with a gangway that would lead on to a new moorage float. So that float is really only 465 feet in length, but it has quite a bit of capacity. And this has some genuine interest with docks and harbors. But there's a fatal flaw with this concept in that the ships can't get under the bridge, at least the larger ones. There's a few in the smaller class could use this, but it will not service the bulk of this fleet to get in and out. So this has some potential, but really only for the smaller vessels. And it's a budget again of 18.5 million estimated for this concept. So let's move on to the next concept. This is Norwegian Cruise Lines and U.S. Coast Guard subport plan. This is very preliminary in nature, obviously. And as I mentioned, that NCL is working with MRV and PND as part of that team. Captain Ed Page and a bunch of other consultants are helping NCL develop their subport property. They will be in front of the public again next week to talk about this. But I was asked to take a look at this by Docks and Harbors just to see if there is any possibility that we could service the small cruise ship fleet at what's being proposed here by NCL. So in general, and I'm only going to speak really to the offshore portion of this overall plan, is that a new pier would be extended basically in line with Whittier Drive, straight offshore. Yeah, there'd be a pile supported deck right in there that would lead to a drive down transfer bridge that lands onto a central pontoon, not unlike the 16B berths. This would be a floating berth as well. And then offshore from that are mooring dolphins. NCL only proposes to use one side of this berth for their ships, and they're going to leave the other side for other operations, because as you can see, this berth would interrupt the Coast Guard operations. You can see remnants of the Coast Guard deck off to the left, basically at the bow of the NCL ship there. So this would interrupt the vessel operations for the Coast Guard, and so NCL has agreed to have the Coast Guard vessels raft up on the inside berth of the floating pontoon. So that's kind of NCL's plan, and I won't speak any more about it. But in terms of what it could happen for an independent float, just to service these small cruise ships, there is a little bit of sliver of space, if you will, to put an independent float right in this vicinity. It's 280 feet long. It would have a gangway, a separate independent gangway from the deck, and there'd be another gangway at the other end of the float that goes onto the floating pontoon. This would service only one of the larger small cruise ships or a couple of the smaller ones. It doesn't have any upland space associated with it, so the parking and staging and all those other needs really would really have to work hard at coming up with something, because the rest of the uplands are going to be occupied by their NCL operations. So this is one idea. It is a lower cost option as compared to some of the others, and it's budgeted at about 7.1 million. So let's just move on to the next idea. So this is what is emerged as the preferred plan thus far. We're calling it the NOAA Seadrome concept. So if you just consider what I just discussed for the NCL facility and left all that plan in place, this facility moves to the east a little bit and is focused on NOAA property, Gold Belt property, CBJ property. So it would be an endeavor that would require quite a bit of cooperation and coordination between all of those entities to work. But in essence, what it does is it expands the uplands. You can see it in enlarged parking area. We have another view of that I'm going to show you here shortly, but basically it advances both fill and a pile supported deck offshore. And by doing that, you would have to slide the existing Seadrome float seaward as well, and would connect into a new deck right there. So that's the existing gangway and float. And then to the west of that would be the new small cruise ship float. And so this is a 32 by 350 foot float, and is accessed by a drivable transfer bridge off the deck. And so vehicles could come right through the parking area and drive right on down and turn around and come back up. And there is an option here for NOAA, and they occasionally come in and would like a floating berth. So just through scheduling and whatnot through docks and harbors, they would be served there as well. When they needed to load heavy load operations off their upland facility, they would move to the pile supported deck and load from there. So you can just see some ship maneuvers up off that float. But if we could move to the next slide here, this is, and we're going to probably toggle back and forth a little bit. This is what the existing conditions look like right now. There's a variety of different parcels held there by different property owners, and there's be a lot of coordination that would have to happen for this to work. We have been in discussions, obviously, with NOAA and Gold Belt, and both are looking favorable at this as a possibility, but certainly, you know, quite a bit of work would need to happen before that could take place. So if we go to the next slide, this is the uplands developed. So let's toggle back real quick one. There's existing, and now moving forward, here's what's proposed. So you can basically see a fairly significant uplands expansion. It would not be unlike what's occurred over the past year or so for the deck over project next to the parking lot, where there was some fill placed behind a retaining wall, and then there was some seaward pile supported deck. This would be somewhat similar in nature to that. Yeah, you would end up with, in the uplands, 39 passenger vehicle parking stalls up in there. You would end up with 8 B-zone parking stalls right there with a canopy for those patrons getting off the buses and whatnot. At the top of both of the gangways would be covered shelters for people getting out of the weather. And there's also a space up near a revised entryway that larger coaches that would be in front of the Seadrome. There's a little space for them to come in and park right there, along with a covered shelter there. So there's a lot of upland circulation improvements here, both for pedestrians and for vehicles. And then in this slide, you can also see where the small cruise ship moorage float is extended right there. Yeah. So this is a project that had a budget of 20. Let's see, where was I with this? $25.5 million for this overall project. But it has a lot of community opportunity here with the Seawalk being able to be able to extend in both directions back towards the subport and in front of the NOAA and Coast Guard, as well as towards town. In the future, there could be some gangway access to a floating Seawalk fronting the hangar and so forth, if those operations desire to have that. You know, that's would be something that would be a ways in the future as well. There's seaplanes that operate out of there and vessels operate out of there, but it does open up at least the idea or the notion to do something larger for the community and have a connected Seawalk if that were the case. So if we can move to the next slide. This is what the site would look like, just an artistic rendering. This is James Bibb from Northwind. This is his sketching, and you can kind of give a better visualization of what's going on there. So next slide. So the advantages of this facility, it does provide 700 feet of lineal moorage, provides plenty of uplands for parking, staging, and pedestrian circulation, has the flexibility for extensive seawalk extensions. It meets the cruise line's objectives for the central downtown location, and it has some preliminary support from the adjacent property owners at NOAA and Gold Belt. So as I had mentioned, it's going to take quite a bit of work to get it moved forward, but it does have some preliminary support. So what I would like to do now as we move forward to the next slide is pass this on to Captain Ed Page, and he'll talk about some of the navigational issues.
I'm the executive director for the Marine Exchange of Alaska. I'm involved in several port projects over the years. My maritime career extends about 50 years, a little bit more than I actually hate to admit it. I first entered the Coast Guard in '68. Had a good fortune of bringing Coast Guard ship from Boston up to Juneau in 1973, so a very different looking port in '73. During my 30-year Coast Guard career, I served a variety of marine safety assignments and involved in port development projects and assessing the maritime challenges of modifying ports. And my last 20 years with the Marine Exchange, I've been building systems that help facilitate transportation of vessels to and from ports by providing current sensors, tidal current sensors, like we've done the Port of Juneau, weather sensors, and then a vessel tracking system using automatic identification system. And that's what we've done is explored how vessels have maneuvered previously at the Seadrome facility and see if these designs that we have in mind here actually going to accommodate safe transit to and from. They're not going to be prevented from making approaches because of weather conditions, what have you. So it looks very, very promising. And the things that we looked into with my staff was, the types of vessels, dimensions, and type of propulsion, the surface area exposed to the wind. That can greatly impact the vessel's maneuverability if the huge beam of a vessel and a high profile would potentially at times with the wind on the beam could make a very difficult approach. Fortunately, the winds are in line with the bow and stern of the vessel with this design that we have right here. The wind strength and direction, we looked at that historically with our weather sensors. We have several of them in the port, and tidal currents and velocity and direction was explored, and then the physical spacing of these docks. So we go to the next slide. It goes a little more detail on, again, we're looking at vessels less than 275 feet in length. Most of these vessels are designed to pull into relatively small port areas and facilities, so they're quite maneuverable. They typically, instead of a single screw, they have twin screws. They often, in most cases, have a bow thruster and/or stern thruster. And they're lower profile, so the wind does not impact them as much when it's on the beam as larger vessels, what you see in our port, which are huge and like office buildings laid on their side. Well, these don't have that same exposure. So that's good for us because they are quite maneuverable and they shouldn't be that challenged in coming to this facilities that we're exploring, considering as far as building in the future. Next slide. And so we looked at our weather sensors we have in the port historically, and the biggest concern is when wind is over 20 knots, how that would impact a vessel. And we looked at that from our sensors from the north and from the south. This is just an example. We looked at how many, every 30 minutes, we have a record of what that wind speed every 30 minutes. We actually collected every minute, but we only looked at every 30 minutes. So that it could be as many as 48 every half hour, 48 times that we looked at it, there was over 20 knots. Well, that was very infrequent, as you can see. There's only a couple days that we had most of the day over 20 knots. And fortunately, it'd be from the north, or the other graphics that we explored and looked at would be from the south. So in either case, that is not as problematic when it's the bow or the stern is facing the winds. The beam was facing the winds, would be more problematic. But fortunately, the alignment of these docks that we're looking at are oriented more with the north and south winds, northwest and southeast. So we explored that for approach and departures. The next slide will give you a little more feel for what else we looked at. We looked also historically. The vessels are required, if they're over 65 feet, to have an automatic identification system. They transmit every couple seconds their course, speed, and direction. And we have AIS receivers throughout Alaska, but in particular, we have here right in Juneau. We've used this extensively when we did the cruise ship, large cruise ship dock 16B years ago. We did the same kind of analysis, looking historically how vessels transit. And as you can see, using the Seadrome, which is facility, which is pretty much the same orientation of direction as the dock that we're proposing, almost exactly for that matter. And you can see how vessels made their approaches to and from without incident to those facilities at the sea drum, which are right nearby where we're going, planning on going to in the future if this materializes. So that was comforting. The approach is the blue color, and departure is the red color. Sometimes they'll spin around to go bow or stern first, or when they're departures, they will spin around. But basically, there's a pretty clean path. And so we looked at all the vessels that come, and I got a couple examples. One more slide is another example of next slide if you can. It shows you again some vessels are making approaches to these proposed facilities and how they make that without making it uneventful. It's not really a challenge, and they still have plenty of room to deal with vessels on either side because they're maneuverable in the size orientation there. You can see that relative size-wise and distance-wise and spatially, they have maneuvering room that should be make it pretty easy to arrive and depart from these facilities that we're exploring. And then the next slide is just one more example. Next slide, we got it. My next slide. That's the next one. It's the last one, maybe. But it could be my last slide. So basically, you know, when we look at the wind, the current, historical paths of vessels, the size, the capabilities of vessels, it's pretty clear that the orientation proposed for these facilities here can easily accommodate vessels and make safe and efficient departures and arrivals to that facility. So it looks like a good orientation and a good plan. That's in my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Hello, my name is Chris Myrtle. I'm a landscape architect in here in Juneau with Corvus Design, and we've been working with P&D and Dick Somerville for 20 plus years on Juneau and other waterfront communities. So it's great to work on this one. What I wanted to do is, you know, a lot of what Dick and Captain Page have talked about, these facilities are pretty much locked in stone. They are where they have to be just to get the required depths for the vessels, the required slopes of the gangways and everything. And what we want to do is get public input and understand how can we make the uplands meet the needs of the community and provide a better visitor experience. So again, taking a look at the master plan, it would be a new facility that has parking for both passengers and people that be working there, a series of B-zone parking for people that need to get on smaller tours in the airporter style vans. So that would be developed. And then really what we're excited about is the development and the expansion of the Seawalk and providing covered areas for people that need to get on the ships. But what we'd like to do is get a little bit of input from you and figure out how we can improve upon the uplands. And I think what we're going to do is we're up over pretty close to 30 some participants now, is that you can either enter your input via chat and we'll record that. Linda's also going to live input your input into the slides. So if you want to, in an orderly fashion, if you don't want to chat, and that may be the preferred way because we have so many people participating, you can either unmute yourself and just give us what your concerns are, or just enter it in the chat and we'll be also recording that. So the first question we are asking you is, what are your concerns that we need to be aware of for the upland facilities? And when we're saying the upland facilities, it's the Seawalk, shelters, parking, and landscaping. So what are your concerns with this plan? And again, if anyone wants to jump in, they can unmute themselves or they can enter their input through the chat box.
Hey, Chris, it looks like Carla Hart has her hand up.
Hello, Carla, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Hey, I don't see where you all are taking into consideration operational concerns and community concerns beyond actual physical infrastructure.
And would you like to expand on that a little bit more, Carla?
Yeah, right now, as you know, some people in the community feel that we've reached a capacity for cruise tourism. And I see this being segmented out between the large cruise ships, the intermediate cruise ships, and the small cruise ships. However, to some sense, a passenger is a passenger and a bus is a bus, and a helicopter over my house is a helicopter. And so I'm wondering how you're working on cumulative impacts with respect to what this is, and how you're working on increased bus traffic out of a very congested area onto the street, right turn only. That puts more traffic through downtown. Left turn is going to be a problem. I see a lot of pretty pictures and facilities, but not much on the way that it operates and works.
Sure. No, thanks for your input, Carla. Keep in mind that right now we're doing conceptual planning for these facilities. So there will definitely be some more in-depth analysis and inventory. So that's why your input is perfect, Carla. So saying you have congestion issues and understanding traffic issues. So those are all the things that we want to hear. And yes, those are things that need to be tackled as we move forward. So thank you, Carla. Does anyone else have any input that they'd like to add? And unfortunately, as a participant, I can't see when people put up hands. So Linda, you as a co-host do get to see if people put up their hands.
Yeah, Linda and I will be watching. So if you raise your
Perfect.
hand, we'll flip back and forth and we will unmute you and we'll announce when it's your turn.
And then I see there's several discussions in the chat about traffic patterns for buses and other vehicles onto Main Street. Traffic again.
One of the things I can talk to on the traffic patterns for this proposed expansion to parking, TBMP has a requirement that buses only make right turns out of the Seadrome lot. And so when a bus needs to make a left turn, they would turn right and then they would use the roundabout down by the parking garage and the library. And so that is to reduce the impacts of trying to cross Egan there. So those kinds of best management practices would remain in effect, and they'd be augmented too if there were needs identified to keep the traffic from impacting others. I see a hand raised. Sue Schrader, you are unmuted.
Yes, thank you. I just want to know to what extent all of you have worked on this master plan, have viewed it in coordination with the downtown master plan. And I don't know what the current status of that is, but certainly I'm assuming, at least from a few preliminary meetings I was on quite a while ago for the downtown plan, there was a lot of discussion about the uplands development around the subport area. So have you, at least at this point, comported your plan with the downtown master plan?
Eric, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure, yeah. So are you referring to the Marine Park to Taku Dock downtown master plan? Is that what the plan you're referring to, Ms. Schrader?
Well, I'm trying to remember. It's the blueprint downtown. It was, I don't know the exact delineation of that planning
Sure.
process, but it's, I believe there was a blueprint downtown.
Yes. Yeah. So we have been involved with the blueprint downtown just as a participant. And so we have been coordinating with the information that we've seen through that public process. And so we are aware of it. And while we haven't laid our current plan next to the downtown blueprint project, we've been very involved with it throughout the process.
And then I see several comments that we'll pick up that I don't think there's only one that looks like it's a question. And Mr. Somerville, this goes to you. If the NCL dock is not built, how does it impact this project? Is the Coast Guard still be at their existing pier?
Yes, if NCL doesn't move forward with their dock, there would be nothing that would change, I don't believe, on that end of the pier. And so on that end of the subport. So we would just be focused on the NOAA end of the subport.
Okay. And then there's a concern about sustainability goals and timeline of Seawalk versus the uplands.
We also have a hand raised for Sarah.
Thank you, Linda.
I will unmute Sarah.
Hey,
All right, Sarah, you are
this is
unmuted.
actually Kevin. Sarah's computer is better than Kevin's. I have a question in terms of the sustainability aspect. On your existing features of your master plan, I noticed one of the lots was like it was very tiny, but it was like a conservation lot. And I'm wondering, has there been any consideration to environmental mitigation somewhere else that's not specifically on this site to kind of supplement the development of the uplands on this site? And I'm fully aware that this is mostly historical fill, but still just in terms of that, has there been any consideration? And then on the site itself, is there any facility that's like year-long kind of residents geared towards, or are they all just for visitors on these boats?
So I'll start the answer to that question. We have permitted facilities similar to this where we have made long-term mitigation a part of it. So it sort of comes down to the permitting process through the Army Corps. But we have, I'll give you an example for the Auk Bay loading facility out next to the ferry terminal. We have set a large parcel of land out there into a conservation easement with Southeast Land Trust. So that would definitely be a part of any development here. Any sort of mitigation that's necessary would be rolled into that process, either monetarily or if we needed to buy a parcel to set it in perpetual trust. We have done that in the past and we're familiar with what's required. That kind of comes out of the permitting and public process. So that's definitely on the table as if this master plan continues moving towards the actual development phase.
Then I'll jump in.
What was your second question?
Oh, it was about how do we make this a year-round facility? And that's actually one of our next couple of questions that we're going to get to, is understanding how can we make this a year-round facility? So what I'm going to do is we're also going to grab out of the chat, and we'll add these and post those into the questions and the responses. So we're going to move on to question number 2. So what opportunities do we need to capitalize that reduces potential conflicts between local use and tourist use?
We need to capitalize.
And what we're looking for is we're looking for the positive. We've specifically used the word, what opportunities do we need to capitalize that reduces potential conflicts? And if anyone has a response, if you want to raise your hand, Eric and Linda will keep an eye on it, or if you want to put your comments in the chat box.
It sounds like there's also a question, I think from Carla, which she has her hand raised, which might be for Heather, but she is asking about the anticipated trend over the next 10 plus years in size and volume of these ships.
And maybe,
Hi, Carla.
oh, go ahead, Heather.
Sure, I'll just answer that really quickly. Good luck getting any cruise line to tell you what they're doing in 2 years, let alone 10 years. It's really, really hard to predict this market. Although they do construct vessels up to 3 years ahead of time, they can put those vessels anywhere. So it is really, really difficult to project this market. And I've been tracking it for 20 years and they always surprise me. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that definitively. You know, you could ask Dan Blanchard and I don't know what he'd tell you, but cruise lines, they're responding to the market year out, you know, on a year-to-year basis, and they can put their ships anywhere. So it's really hard to say what's going to happen in 10 years.
Right.
Thanks, Heather.
And I actually had my hand, I just thrown that comment in, but I had my hand raised, Chris, because I don't understand what your question is. Like, I genuinely don't understand what you're asking with this. What opportunities do we need to capitalize?
Well, what can we do that's going to reduce? So answers could be, and I don't necessarily want to cede the answers, but it could be have a wider seawalk in this area, create better seawalk connectivities in different areas. We need to put a roundabout at Egan in Maine. You know, I'm just throwing stuff out there, Carla. So again, I'm just looking for what are solutions that we need to be aware of that might reduce any risks that you see? Not risk, any of conflicts.
Hi, Carla. I think we're also trying to, build off of what Kevin had talked about previously, is how do we make this a year-round place for locals, and we don't just focus on the tourists coming in from the cruise ships.
And then we're getting lots of good stuff on the chat. Have you guys asked Centennial Hall Jack about demands for outdoor vendor event space? It is an ideal space if there's overflow, beer fest, holiday events like public markets. So I'm seeing using the parking lot potentially, if I'm reading this correctly, using the parking lot, and this is coming from Sierra, in off use seasons for public events. So that's great. Opportunity for using the event staging when not used by boats, include public art, and modify the schedule so not everyone's being dumped in there during the weekend. When locals would like to come downtown, and limit taxi cab use and petting. So perfect. These are the perfect responses that we're looking for. So thank you.
So Chris, I'll speak to the use of facilities. We are always happy to support local uses. I want to kind of remind people what happens down at the cruise ship docks during the winter. Trove remains open. We usually open the visitor center for the Santa opportunities in December, and we just love seeing everyone come down and go to that winter village that's down there. So there's lots of off-season uses that we want to see in our docks and harbors facilities. So this would just be an outgrowth of that, where if Centennial Hall needs overflow, we're happy to partner with them, and we love to see locals walking the Seawalk all winter long, and we get out there and we plow it with our little John Deere tractor. So we're very mindful of keeping it accessible year-round the best we can with our limited resources, and our staff goes down, of course, during the winter, but we want to see locals out there every day.
Okay, and we're also seeing some more sustainability input from the chat. Require the tourism vehicles to be electric. So that might be putting
comment.
electric power.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep, go ahead, Heather.
Wanted to respond to Sue's question about passengers spreading them out over the week. Cruise lines are the first ones to say, we would love that. They would love to spread out their operations over the week, but it's not what the market wants. The market wants that very week-long base. So that's a challenge. That's a big challenge to spread out traffic over so that it's kind of day by day, spread out over the week. As you saw in the schedule that I presented, it's really bunched on the weekends, and cruise lines would love to not have that, but it's kind of what the market demands.
Thank you, Heather. And Eric and Linda, are you seeing any more hands up? Oh, Sue has her hands up. Visually, she has her hand up.
I thought it was quicker than trying to find that little icon. I think that was Heather that just commented about the market and the cruise lines. I'm sorry, that just doesn't ring true. The cruise lines, well, I'm so sorry that the pandemic has had such an impact on them, alas. But come on, if all the cruise lines got together, as they do on so many other issues, and said, look, we're going to spread out our schedules, then the markets can adjust. I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the cruise lines would love to have their schedules more evenly distributed throughout a week and not bunched up on weekends, particularly small ships. These small ships are expensive. They're catering to retired folks. Whether they leave Iowa on Tuesday or Wednesday for a week cruise, they can figure it out. And I'm sorry, Heather, I just don't think that holds a lot of water.
Thank you for your observations, Sue, as always. So any more hands up? Okay, let's move on to the third question, please. So what are the successes, what of our Juneau Seawalk and Waterfront that you would like us to consider incorporating in this plan? What are the things that you love about the Juneau Waterfront that needs to be incorporated in the plan related to the uplands? And we've already heard public art, public gathering spaces. There it is, the whale tails. Is there other things that you would like to have incorporated that creates continuity and also our successes on our waterfront that we should consider incorporating in this project? Eric, are you seeing any hands up?
Nope, not right now.
Okay. I guess nobody likes our waterfront. It's not successful. Lighting, there we go. They like the lighting design along the seawalk. Continue that. Thank you, Sue. Another good one, continue separation of the security zones and seawalk when possible. In other words, keep the pedestrian, the public access open, limit the restrictions. Carla doesn't like the deck overs. So Carla, while you're typing, if you hate deck overs, would you rather fill, or do you just hate the concept of decking over or filling water as a general concept? Oh, another one that I also love. Yes, the local flora stencils in the balustrades. Agreed.
Hi, Chris. It looks like we have a hand raised from Paula and from Carla.
Yes. Paula, you are able to unmute. There you go.
Hear me? Can
We
you
can
hear me?
now. Yep.
We can hear you.
I don't know if I'm being heard or not. I'm having a little difficulty.
We
Yes,
can hear you,
We
Paula.
can hear you.
Okay. My main concern that I have a question, first of all, are we looking at are you or we looking at an increase in the number of small cruise ships from what it is now? Is that what you're looking at? I mean, is that what you're trying to plan for? That's my first question before I go on.
We're meeting current needs, Paula.
Yeah, so I would say this kind of speaks to the moorage pressures that we see at docks and harbors, with the IVF and to a smaller part the inside of the cruise ship berth being our only moorage space for these vessels. They share the same space as fishing vessels, pleasure craft, and yachts. And so what we did to figure out what capacity we needed was we went back to our records from each day that we bill and all of the reservations that we have. And on the days that we knew that we had to be very, very specific with the hours that vessels had to leave. So we'd say to vessel 1, you can be at our dock until 1 p.m. Then you have to be gone because another vessel is coming in. We have records for that. And so that helped us to record when we were above capacity. Or we knew when a visiting vessel would say, I'd love to be in Juneau for about a week. And we'd say, you have to put money down and you can't stay past this day because we're already booked. So we have a lot of different avenues to know what the pressure is on the IVF from all vessels. And so this idea of a 700 linear foot of moorage comes from knowing that we have these different user groups between fishing vessels, pleasure craft, and these small cruise ships that we're trying to make more space for. So the idea that the small cruise ships have specific needs for access for reprovisioning and the turnaround times that they ask for, that led to this specifically designed facility where it would take the pressure off of the IVF, for instance, that is our transient moorage that people are asking to find moorage on at all hours of the night and day during the summer.
Well, my question basically is, or my comment is on just, I've been on the task force, the Visitor Industry Task Force. And one of the things that we recognize is that we have got right now, I mean, you know, before the virus, we don't know what's happening. We have we have an overabundance of cruise ships coming in, and it's so congested. And I would not want to see this happen even more than, I mean, we came up with some ideas for limitation, but this seems to me like it just could keep growing, and that concerns me, although I absolutely support the smaller cruise ships, but I don't see anything that would limit in any way the capacity of what you're talking about. And that is a concern for me. That doesn't mean less ships. It's just that maybe on different days. That's one of the things that we did in the task force. The recommendation was there would be no more than X number of ships in Juneau on one day, for example. So I think there needs to be some kind of, I don't like the word limitation, but some kind of way of keeping it from just exploding even more than it is. And that's my comment. You don't have
Thank
to.
you, Paula. Paula, do you have any successes? What do you really like about the Juneau Seawalk and its waterfront? Anything you want to contribute?
I like the whale. I like that area, the whale statue.
Okay, perfect. Do you see any more hands raised?
Yes, we have Carla Hart.
She also asked a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if she wants to continue with this question, but are we required to meet the demand for out-of-town boats, giant yachts, and pleasure craft?
So I had put my hand up responding to Chris, to his question about what I liked. One of the things that I see, and in this process, I'm feeling a bit like the Mendenhall Glacier process in that you're trying to shape input in a way that doesn't really give true input. The waterfront with the deck overs that have taken place, the Marine Park deck over for the parking lot, and then the current deck over that's happening on the other side of the parking garage, and then another deck over down the way, is that the waterfront seawalk is actually becoming disconnected from the waterfront. We've disconnected from the shoreline. You no longer see the shoreline on the sea side of the seawalk, or on the land side of the seawalk. And then when you put those giant passenger vessels out on the other side, the docks, you block access and vision to the other side. And so I don't see the seawalk as, it's nice. It's better than not being there, but I don't see it as a great success. I see us as sort of building up to it in a way that destroys it. But I'm really also curious as to a no action alternative. And if we do nothing, can Docks and Harbors prioritize who gets to use the existing infrastructure, looking at what best meets the community desires and economic needs, and simply limit the others either by economics of bidding a limited commodity, or by simply saying that we don't have space? Is that an option? And do all of these improvements that are being proposed, are they self-fundable, or are we going to have any public money into it, either upfront in bonds? Can they self-fund in advance?
Carl,
Not
would
addressing your question, but it's my questions.
Sure. Carl, would you like to chime in and talk about the first question about kind of choosing who to serve first and then the funding?
Yeah, so I'll just start out by saying that we serve the public. We serve the public for whether they're commercial fishing boats or pleasure yachts or locals in a recreational boat or small cruise ships. We serve everybody. So we could limit, that's but that's not what we are as a public entity. We try to provide opportunities for everyone to be successful. As far as the funding goes, and when we tie things up here, I'll talk about, there is no funding for this project. This is a plan. We're seeking input from the public to do the best project forward. We have lots of projects over the years. Docks and Harbors, we pride ourselves on building things. We also, when we're not building things, we plan. So this is just that planning effort to tease out what's good about developing the waterfront, the challenges, and how we can meet everyone's expectations, especially the private citizens of Juneau. So it's very important for us to hear these things and move forward. But as a general rule, Docks and Harbors, we don't pick winners and losers. We look at the market demands, and we try to provide opportunities for everyone to use the waterfront, whether you're a vessel owner or you're a pedestrian along the seawalk. We plan, we listen, and we execute to the best of our ability.
So do we have any more hands up, Eric?
I am not seeing any hands raised right now.
Okay. And I see that Sue just said, I see many, many locals using the Seawalk in the off season and all year long. Encourage you to fully consider how locals use any extension of the Seawalk throughout the project area. Okay, thank you, Sue. And I think you just answered part of our next question, Sue, so well done. So our last question that we have for input, and what we're looking from you is, what improvements can we make to the uplands as part of this project to create a better experience for year-round use? And I think there's been a little bit of input that's kind of wandered a little bit from the question that's been asked. So I think this has been partially answered already, but we're happy to get any input of what are the other improvements that you'd like to see included. So the intent was to ask you what works on the waterfront, what doesn't work on the waterfront, what do you want included in this one as part of the uplands? So this is really the getting a little more detail of what you would like to have included in the project. Lighting and snow and ice removal in winter, I see, is one of the comments. So year-round lighting, snow and removal. Looks like hoping for more public use space all season. And Eric, are you seeing any hands up?
Nope, no hands yet.
Okay. So again, what improvements can we make to the uplands to create a better experience for year-round use? And again, I do think that we've got some input from the previous questions that we can easily filter into this one. So this question has partially already been answered. More covered areas to protect from inclement weather. And then Eric, if we're not seeing any more hands up. Oh, what is meant by uplands? I see we have a question. What is uplands? So Paula, uplands is everything from the Seawalk to Egan. The marine facilities are what they are because they have to be engineered to support the vessels, but we do have flexibility of adding some icing to the cake for the uplands. So that could be everything from landscaping to lighting to sculptures to art, which we've heard. There's a whole variety of things that could be added. Better connectivity with the Seawalk. Make the dock space at water level accessible to the public during winter. 16B is blocked off and not community friendly. Okay, good comment. Provide parking in the off season. Okay, if we're not seeing any more hands and you can continue to punch some responses in, Linda will pick them up. A reminder that we're going to be collecting public comment for the next 2 weeks for people that couldn't make this meeting. This is being recorded, will be posted on the project website, as will the presentation. And then we're inviting people to come in and fill these last 4 questions in, and either submit them to Eric via email, or if you are not an internet-based person, you can get paper copies from the Port Director's office in the Seadrome building and fill those out and leave them with Eric. So with that concludes the public input. Thank you very much for your insightful input. And now we're just going to take any general questions and answers. And again, if you have a question, please raise your hand. If you don't want to ask the question, you can type it into the chat box. And we are at 6:30, but we don't want to limit input if people do have additional questions that haven't been answered at this point.
You can also send questions or messages in the chat box privately if anybody wanted to do that as well. You don't have to share it with everybody.
And if you do want to have something just for the record, it should be sent probably to Linda, please, and she'll enter them into the record. And you will remain anonymous.
Ms. Schrader, you have a comment?
Curiously, I didn't hear about tonight's meeting until this morning, and I had no idea that Docks and Harbors was even working on this master plan. I know you have other public meetings planned, other Zoom meetings coming up, one in early December. And I would really, really encourage you to try to reach out more. I mean, there are, public notices, nothing that the city hasn't been through a million times. So just to try to cast a little wider net, if you will, of people who are interested in this issue. It just seems a little interesting that the public was invited now today after the plan essentially has been totally written. And, unlike comparing it to the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Area master plan, there was early public input there. So yeah, just please do whatever you can to keep the public in the loop, because I think this is an important issue that affects a lot of people.
And Sue, please do go and visit the project website. I did put it in the chat. I can put it in again. It has all the past data. It has all the reports. It has graphics. It has plans. We've been keeping information in there. So it's really a collection of information throughout the project. So that's a really good clearinghouse for you to see what's been done. We did give a little over 2 weeks notice about this meeting. It has been on the CBG website. It has been in the papers. There's posters around town. It's with COVID, it's sometimes a blessing and sometimes it's a curse getting people to know what's going on in the communities. But we have tried really hard to make sure that it was out in front of the public. But it is trying times, and unfortunately some things do get missed. But if you have any ideas of how we can do better next time, we'd be more than happy to learn and get any input from you.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm seeing a couple of questions about, will the dock have a maximum size boat that can use it? Will the intermediate size ships also be able to use this docks if at capacity? And Mr. Somerville, I believe this question is probably to you.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about the size of vessels coming to the new moorage float. We're planning this around a 275-foot maximum length vessel. There are certainly larger vessels than that in the small cruise ship industry, but those are not the ones that we are planning for at this time. So I would say that 275 is the limit or thereabouts. you know, maybe 300 or something like that, but that would be a size limitation. In terms of the intermediate size ships, they will also be able to use that. Anything that could moor at the intermediate, excuse me. No, I misread that. Intermediate size ships, those are larger. So those would have to probably go to the main cruise ship berths, you know, the pontoons at 16B. Those are probably in the range of 300 to 600, I think is what is being referred to there.
Thank you, Dick. Does anyone else have?
Yeah, Carla has her hand up, so I'll unmute her.
Thank you. Sorry, obviously I care about this whole thing. So I posted this on Friends of Auk Bay when I saw it this morning because I saw Auk Bay in the mention. And as you know, the Auk Bay community area plan process, we were essentially unanimous in not wanting any cruise ship traffic in Auk Bay. Unfortunately, that didn't get incorporated into the plan because it was the first day and so unanimous that we all agreed and moved on. But I was told today that Auk Bay wasn't in consideration, in part knowing that the community didn't want it. But it seemed like in Mr. Somerville's run through of things that he was still leaving the opportunity open to consider having small ships in Auk Bay. I didn't hear him mention anything about the Auk Bay community or area plan not wanting to have cruise ships there. So as someone who is coordinating and communicating with folks in Auk Bay and told them they don't need to pay attention tonight, I'm lacking the reassurance at this point that Auk Bay is off the table completely.
I'll answer that one. That was me that reached out to you. So,
Yes, thank you.
yeah. Mr. Somerville's role is to look at the design parameters. So his explanation was that the long-term vision for adding any moorage to the Auk Bay Marine Station could incorporate a facility that was large enough to handle that class of vessels. But it wasn't a point to talk about what the community wanted. It was just to talk about the facilities capabilities if that long-term vision ever came to fruition. As for cruise ships using Auk Bay, as Carl stated, we look to support the community through all vessel uses. So if the assembly decided that there would be some sort of legislation that would prevent cruise ships from using Auk Bay, that would be adhered to. We're not building a facility in Auk Bay to say all cruise ships must move out to Auk Bay. So it really is in the public's hands to decide through the assembly if there are moratoriums or if there are limits or if there are caveats on what can happen in Auk Bay as an example. So we're not advocating for it. We've shown that our market study says there's no pressure to make a new facility out there because the market wants to be downtown. And so that was my comment to you, was that it's basically a non-starter for us to facilitate a design or, you know, to move this process through when looking at Auk Bay, because there are so many other options that meet more of the check boxes that we've outlined in this presentation.
And Carla, just to add to the conversation, so it was one of the 6 sites from the original 13 or 15 that we looked at. And then this summer during the public meeting at the Docks and Harbors meeting, the Seadrome site was the preferred site. So that is the direction the team is moving towards at this point. So Dick was just giving you background information so that you could understand why we're moving towards, or that the Seadrome NOAA site is the preferred site.
Okay, thank you. It just sounds to me like another project to put on my list is to get the assembly to pass something that says no to cruise ships in Auk Bay, so that it's just off the table and we don't always have to be watching and wondering if we missed something. So thank you.
So are you seeing any more hands up, Eric?
I am
And
not.
the chat box has been quiet for the last 5 minutes.
There, so I'd like to speak just a little bit about trying to get the message out for this meeting. As Chris said, we did have it on the city website where all of the city meetings are held, and we've been sharing on Facebook. We also have the Tideline, which is a monthly production that we put out where we highlight projects and things that we'd like to share with our community. And it's come to our attention that we've, I guess, over communicated because GCI thinks that we are a spam bot now. And so we're getting bounce backs from all of our recipients who signed up for the Tideline. So we apologize if the Tideline was one of the avenues that you received an update from Docks and Harbors, because we are very proud of it. And we're disheartened to find out that GCI is not sending it out to the signed up recipients. So we're still working through the technical glitch to figure out how to get back in the good graces with GCI, but we really recommend that you let us know if you've been receiving the Tideline and it's stopped and you want a copy in a different way. You might check out our Facebook page, because I think that's the most controllable method to disseminate that right now. But we really try to be as proactive as possible and get you the highlights each month through that publication. Any other comments that people want to share right now?
And then I did just throw in the chat box one more time. I know it's come up a couple of times, but this is the project website.
So I see a question about cruise lines wanting shore power. So what we understand is that there may not be an interest at the moment for the short turnaround time that they're in port, but I think that we're still interested in constructing the infrastructure to supply these vessels with electricity. The IVF and the float below the Port Field office, they both have 100 amp power, and it's very common that vessels of this size use that. I think that would still be something that we would look to incorporate into any new facility that we make. So while they may not want it now, I think we're going to continue with the idea that we have it available, because it's so valuable for any size vessel that would use this. So that's just to answer that. We do typically see the request for shore type power, and we would continue to investigate adding that, just as we have on the PFO float and the IVF. So that's not off the table, just because some of the respondents in the cruise industry said they don't want it at this point.
And it looks like our attendance is dropping quickly here. So last call on questions, either in the chat box or by raising your hand. Otherwise, we will thank you for your time. And Carl, do you have any closing comments?
I'll be brief, but thank you, Chris. And I just want to thank the presenters, and also thank everybody that hung in there for the last hour and a half. And just a few thoughts when we leave tonight. Nothing is cooked in this plan yet. This is, this is a public process. The Docks and Harbors Board is still in the process of approving it. It still goes before the assembly. We still have no money at all for this project. So that's the important thing to realize, that of all the projects that Docks and Harbors has executed, some of them take 10, 15 years to execute, but they all started with a plan. They all started with public input. They all started with, hey, what is it that the public wants? What is it that the community desires? And we try to meet all those concerns. If you like the Seawalk, this preferred plan that was articulated, that it really is a plan that will link the Seawalk, continue that process of Seawalk from Bridge Park down to the AJ dock. So there's a lot of good things about this preferred alternative that we're looking at right now. Again, nothing is cooked at this point, and it's important to hear everything that all the comments that we've received today. I also just want to point out that, yes, we work very closely with the Blueprint Downtown folks that are doing another, community master plan. So I've presented it for them. They are fully aware of this project. And then the other thing that was brought up is the Visitor Industry Task Force, the mayor's Visitor Industry Task Force. One of the recommendations was to incentivize Juneau as a small cruise ship turnaround port. So we are, even though that the draft recommendations are still a draft from the task force, but certainly we heard loud and clear that there was a desire from that group to build infrastructure to support Juneau as a turnaround port. So with that, I really appreciate everybody's time today. And again, hats off to the great presenters we've had, all local companies, and we're very proud of that. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue and moving forward and planning something that as a community we can be proud of. Thank you.
And just a reminder, Eric, before you close everything out, please save the chat box and of course the recording.
I've saved the chat box.
Okay, Linda has saved the chat box. Perfect. So that concludes the meeting. Eric, do you have anything to close out on?
I don't. Thank you for everyone attending. We really appreciate hearing your comments.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.